A rich man rescued a homeless girl and hired her as a nurse for his sick son. He installed a camera. The rain pounded against the windshield in relentless sheets, each drop blurring the world outside into a mess of flickering streetlights and darkened figures rushing for shelter. Rafael Montoya barely noticed. His hands rested on his lap, his fingers lightly tapping against his expensive suit pants, a nervous tic he had developed over the years. The city stretched before him, vast and indifferent, yet Rafael felt as if he were completely alone within it. Success had come early to him. A self-made businessman, he had built an empire with his bare hands, turning an ambitious dream into a reality that commanded respect in the highest circles of society. He was powerful, wealthy beyond measure, a name people whispered in admiration and sometimes in fear. And yet, none of it meant anything. None of it had ever filled the void inside him. A space hollowed out by the one thing that no amount of money could buy, his son's happiness. Emilio. The name was both a blessing and a curse to Rafael. His son was the one thing that tethered him to the world. The only reason he pushed himself forward. Yet the pain of watching him suffer was unbearable. Ever since his wife's death, Emilio had become a shadow of himself, retreating into silence, plagued by an illness that robbed him of his childhood. Rafael had spent fortunes on doctors, therapists, and specialists. None of it had helped. The boy barely spoke, barely responded to the world around him. And Rafael, for all his power, was powerless. The car jolted to a sudden stop, yanking him from his dark thoughts. His driver, Julio, turned slightly, his voice laced with concern. "Apologies, sir, there's someone in the middle of the road." Frowning, Rafael leaned forward, peering through the rain-splattered glass. At first, all he could see was the distorted figure of a person huddled under the downpour. Then Julio turned on the high beams, and suddenly, the scene became clearer. A young woman stood in the street, her thin frame shaking, her arms wrapped protectively around a small child who clung to her with desperate fingers. The boy's cries were muffled by the storm, but the way he buried his face into her shoulder spoke volumes of his fear. Something tightened in Rafael's chest. It wasn't just the sight of them standing there, vulnerable and drenched. It was the way the woman held the child. The way she used her own body as a shield against the cold. As if she would rather take on all the pain and suffering than let it touch the little one. The way his wife used to hold Emilio. Without thinking, Rafael reached for the door handle. "Sir," Julio began, but Rafael cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. He stepped out into the rain, the icy drops instantly soaking through his expensive suit, plastering his dark hair to his forehead. But he barely felt it. His focus was on the girl in front of him. She looked up as he approached, startled, her wide eyes filled with both defiance and vulnerability. Dark strands of wet hair clung to her face, and her lips were slightly parted as if she wanted to speak but didn't know what to say. She was young, too young to be standing here, shivering in the middle of the street, trying to protect a child who clearly wasn't hers. "What are you doing here?" Rafael's voice was firm, but not unkind. He stopped a few feet away, not wanting to startle them. The woman hesitated, clutching the boy closer before finally speaking. He was lost," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, almost swallowed by the storm. "I found him alone in an alley. I tried to find help, but I don't know where to take him. He's scared, and he won't stop crying." Rafael's gaze shifted to the child. He was small, no more than 4 or 5, his tiny fingers digging into the fabric of the woman's soaked jacket. And then Rafael looked back at her. She was trembling, her clothes tattered, her shoes caked in mud. A girl with nothing to her name, standing in the rain, holding onto a child that wasn't hers simply because she didn't want him to be alone. A strange emotion stirred in Rafael's chest. Most people would have walked away. Most people would have turned their backs. But she hadn't. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself with the gentleness in his own tone. She hesitated before answering. "Clara." "And the boy?" She shook her head. "I don't know. He won't tell me his name." Rafael exhaled, his breath coming out in a mist. He should walk away. He should call the authorities and let them deal with this. But something about this girl, about the way she held that child, about the exhaustion and determination in her eyes, wouldn't let him. "Come with me," he said before he could stop himself. Clara blinked in surprise. I have a son, Raphael continued, his voice steady despite the storm raging around them. He's sick, and he's scared, just like this boy. I think you could help him. The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Clara stared at him, searching his face as if trying to decipher what kind of man he was. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, finally, she nodded. Okay, she whispered, but I won't stay long. Just until I can find my brother. Her brother. Raphael barely registered the last words. He only felt the tension in his chest ease slightly, as if he had made the right choice, though he couldn't explain why. He gestured to Julio, who rushed forward to help them into the car. The child, now quiet, nestled into Clara's arms as she settled into the seat. Raphael took one last look at the rain-drenched streets before getting in beside them. The warmth of the car a stark contrast to the cold storm outside. For the first time in years, as he watched Clara gently stroke the boy's back, Raphael felt something he had long since forgotten. Hope. And though he didn't know it yet, this moment, this small, impulsive decision, would change all of their lives forever. The golden glow of the mansion's lights was almost blinding as Rafael Montoya stepped out of the car. The rain had finally begun to let up, though the cold still clung to the night air, wrapping around them like an invisible shroud. Clara hesitated as she stepped onto the marble driveway, her soaked shoes making a soft squelching sound against the pristine stone. She had never seen a house like this. No, not a house, a palace. It loomed before her, grand and cold, as if it belonged to another world entirely. A world where people like her didn't exist. Raphael turned to her, his face unreadable in the dim light. Come inside, he said. His voice wasn't unkind, but it held the weight of authority, a tone Clara had long since learned to obey. She nodded, shifting the child in her arms, and followed him up the grand steps. As the heavy double doors swung open, warmth washed over her, a stark contrast to the storm that had nearly drowned her outside. A woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper demeanor stood in the entrance hall, her hands clasped in front of her as though she were already passing judgment. Marina. Raphael acknowledged her with a brief nod. This is Clara. She'll be staying here for a while. Marina's lips tightened, her gaze flickering over Clara's dripping clothes, the way she clung protectively to the small boy in her arms. Staying? She repeated, her tone laced with disbelief. Yes, Raphael answered simply, leaving no room for discussion. Clara swallowed hard, her hands tightening around the child. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but it certainly wasn't this. She had imagined gratitude, maybe, a rich man taking pity on a lost child. Instead, there was only tension, a heavy weight pressing down on her as Marina's scrutinizing gaze cut into her. But it wasn't Marina she cared about. It was the boy. She turned her attention to him, gently brushing his damp hair from his forehead. Are you all right? She whispered. The boy nodded hesitantly, his tiny fingers still clutching at her sleeve. He had stopped crying, but his eyes were wide and frightened, scanning his unfamiliar surroundings. Clara knew that feeling all too well. Take him to one of the guest rooms. Raphael instructed one of the servants. Make sure he's warm and fed. Clara hesitated, feeling a strange reluctance to let go, but the servant reached out carefully, prying the boy from her grasp. His small whimper of protest nearly broke her heart, but before she could say anything, the servant carried him away. Come, Raphael said, we need to talk. Clara followed him down a long corridor, past opulent chandeliers and marble floors so polished they reflected her blurry, uncertain expression. Everything about this place felt suffocating, like a cage lined with gold. Finally, they stopped in a sitting room, the warm glow of a fireplace casting flickering shadows on the walls. Sit. Raphael gestured to a chair opposite him. Clara hesitated before obeying, her hands twisting in her lap. She didn't belong here. Every instinct in her screamed to run. Raphael watched her carefully, as though trying to piece her together. Tell me the truth, he said at last. Who are you? Really? She swallowed, suddenly feeling exposed under his piercing gaze. I told you, my name is Clara. I don't have anywhere to go. And the boy? I found him, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. He was alone. I couldn't just leave him. Why not? Raphael leaned forward slightly. Most people would have. She looked away, her jaw tightening. Because I know what it's like to be left behind. Silence stretched between them. Raphael exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. I didn't bring you here out of charity, he admitted. My son, Emilio, he's sick. He barely speaks. Nothing I do seems to help. But when I saw the way you comforted that boy in the rain. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. I need someone who can reach him. Someone who can bring him out of that darkness. And I think you can. Clara's eyes widened in surprise. You want me to, what? Be his nanny? More than that, Raphael said, his voice low, urgent. I want you to help him. However you can. She hesitated, her mind reeling. This wasn't what she had expected. A warm meal. A place to sleep for the night, yes. But this? Why me? She whispered. Raphael's expression darkened. Because I've hired the best doctors. The best therapists. And none of them have done a damn thing. You might be his last chance. A lump formed in Clara's throat. She had never been anyone's last chance before. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, slowly, she nodded. I'll try. It was the only promise she could make. Raphael studied her for a moment longer before standing. I'll have a room prepared for you. You'll start tomorrow. Clara rose, feeling as though her legs might give out beneath her. All right, she murmured. As she turned to leave, Raphael spoke again. One more thing. She looked back at him. I need to know I can trust you, he said, his voice unreadable. So I'll be watching. A chill ran down Clara's spine. Watching? She didn't know what he meant by that. But something in his tone sent a shiver of unease through her. Still, she nodded. Okay. She left the room, her heart pounding in her chest. That night, as she lay in the unfamiliar warmth of the guest room, she stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. She was in a mansion, under the roof of a powerful man who barely knew her, entrusted with the care of a sick child. It felt like a dream, or a trap. And then there was Raphael himself, his presence, his intensity. He was unlike anyone she had ever met. There was something haunted in his eyes, something broken beneath the hardened exterior. She understood that kind of pain. Maybe that was why she had said yes. Or maybe, deep down, she knew that she needed this just as much as he did. She turned onto her side, staring out the window as the last remnants of rain trickled down the glass. Tomorrow, everything would change. And she had no idea if it would be for better or for worse. Keep watching to see what happens next. Will Clara be able to reach Emilio? Will Raphael finally find peace? Or will the secrets of the past threaten to destroy them all? Leave a comment below with your thoughts. Should Clara trust Raphael? What do you think will happen next? Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next part of the story. The walls of the mansion felt like they were closing in on Clara. She stood in the middle of the guest room Raphael had assigned to her, staring at her reflection in the oval mirror above the small wooden desk. The dim light from the bedside lamp cast shadows on her face, making her look even more exhausted than she felt. The events of the night played over and over in her mind. The rain, the boy she found in the alley, Raphael's unexpected offer. Now, here she was, inside a world she never imagined stepping into. A place where everything smelled of wealth and power, thick carpets under her feet, heavy curtains drawn against the night, furniture so polished she could see her reflection in every surface. It was overwhelming, suffocating. Clara took a shaky breath and turned away from the mirror. She peeled off her wet clothes, shivering as the cold air hit her skin. A maid had brought her fresh clothes, soft cotton pajamas, far better than anything she had ever owned. They smelled of lavender. She hesitated before putting them on, feeling like an imposter slipping into a life that didn't belong to her. She didn't deserve this kindness. Or at least, that's what she had been told her entire life. You're nothing, Clara. No one will ever want you. The voice from her past echoed in her mind, clawing at her self-worth like a relentless phantom. Shaking her head, she climbed into bed, pulling the warm blankets over her. The rain had finally stopped, leaving only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside. Despite the comfort of the bed, sleep didn't come easily. Her thoughts drifted to Emilio, Raphael's son, a child who barely spoke, a boy trapped in his own pain. She had only seen a glimpse of him earlier when Marina had led him away. He had looked so small, so fragile. The haunted emptiness in his eyes reminded her of herself when she was young. Alone, unwanted, She clenched the blanket in her fists. Tomorrow, she would meet him properly. And if Raphael was right, if she truly could help him, then maybe, just maybe, she could prove to herself that she wasn't worthless after all. But as she finally drifted into sleep, she had no idea that her real test would begin far sooner than she expected. A sharp cry shattered the silence. Clara jolted awake, her heart hammering in her chest. She sat up, disoriented, her breath coming in quick gasps. Then she heard it again. A child's cry. Emilio. Without thinking, she threw off the blankets and rushed out of her room, her bare feet silent against the marble floor. The hallway was dark, save for the faint glow of a nightlight down the corridor. She followed the sound, her pulse quickening. When she reached Emilio's door, she hesitated for only a second before pushing it open. The sight before her made her breath catch. Emilio was curled up in the corner of his bed, his small body trembling, his hands covering his ears as he rocked back and forth. Tears streamed down his pale cheeks, and his chest heaved with the force of his sobs. Clara's heart clenched. She knew this. She had lived this. Slowly, she stepped closer. "Emilio?" she called softly, careful not to startle him. He didn't react, still trapped in whatever nightmare had gripped him. Clara knelt beside the bed, her voice gentle. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe." Emilio flinched but didn't look at her. His breathing was ragged, his tiny fingers digging into the sheets. He's trapped in his fear. Clara realized, just like I used to be. Taking a deep breath, she reached out, but stopped just inches away. Touching him now might only make it worse. Instead, she did the only thing she knew might work. She started humming, a soft, wordless melody, the same one she had sung to her younger brother Gabriel when he was scared in the foster home. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Emilio's rocking slowed, his sobs softened, his fingers loosened their grip. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, his wide, tear-filled eyes lifted to meet hers. Clara smiled softly. "Hi," she whispered. Emilio sniffled, still trembling but no longer sobbing uncontrollably. "You had a bad dream, didn't you?" she asked gently. He hesitated, then gave the tiniest nod. Clara nodded too. "I used to have bad dreams all the time," she admitted. "I know how scary they can be." Emilio blinked at her, his small lips parted slightly. For a child who barely spoke, even his silence spoke volumes. Clara reached for a blanket at the foot of the bed and carefully draped it over his shoulders. "You don't have to be afraid," she murmured. "You're safe here." Emilio hesitated, then, slowly, he scooted closer. Clara's breath hitched. It was the smallest movement, but it meant everything, a silent plea for comfort. And Clara, without thinking, opened her arms. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emilio leaned into someone, into her. The weight of his small body against hers was almost too much to bear. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't the one searching for comfort. She was the one giving it. Unbeknownst to Clara, she wasn't the only one witnessing this moment. In his office, Rafael Montoya sat frozen in front of a screen. The baby monitor he had installed in Emilio's room had been running all night. He hadn't meant to spy on Clara, only to ensure his son's safety. But as he watched the footage, his chest tightened. No one had ever reached Emilio like that. Not the therapists, not the doctors, not even Rafael himself. But this girl, this homeless girl he had picked up off the street, had done in minutes what years of professional help had failed to achieve. And she didn't even realize it. Rafael exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. For the first time in years, a flicker of hope burned in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, he had made the right choice bringing her here. Maybe Clara wasn't just another outsider. Maybe she was exactly what this house had been missing all along. But Rafael also knew one thing for certain. If Clara had that kind of power over Emilio, it meant she had power over him, too. And that terrified him more than anything. Clara had spent most of her life being unwanted. People had taken one look at her and decided what she was worth. Nothing. Just another stray. Just another lost cause. So when she stepped into the grand dining room of Rafael Montoya's mansion that morning, she was already bracing herself for rejection. She could feel the judgment in the air before anyone even said a word. The long dining table stretched before her, lined with plates of fresh fruit. warm bread, and steaming coffee that smelled richer than anything she had ever tasted. But she had no appetite. Not when Marina was standing at the other end of the room. Arms crossed, a thin smile stretching across her lips. You slept well, I assume? Marina's voice was honeyed but sharp, dripping with something that made Clara's stomach churn. Clara nodded cautiously. Yes, thank you. Marina's eyes flickered over her with the same scrutiny one might give an unwelcome insect. That's surprising. Most people would be too nervous to sleep in a house they don't belong in. Clara stiffened. She knew this was a test. Marina was trying to rattle her, make her feel out of place. But Clara had survived worse. So she lifted her chin, forcing a calm tone. I'm grateful for the room, Miss Marina, and for the opportunity to help Emilio. Marina's smile faltered, ever so slightly. But before she could respond, a soft voice interrupted. Miss Clara? Clara turned, and there he was. Emilio, the frail little boy she had comforted the night before. He stood hesitantly in the doorway, his small hands gripping the frame as if he weren't sure he was allowed to enter. For a second, he just stared at her. Then, to Clara's astonishment, he took slow, cautious steps across the room, toward her. Everyone at the table froze. Even Raphael, who had been silently reading the newspaper, lowered it to watch. Clara remained still, waiting, holding her breath. Emilio stopped beside her chair and, without a word, gently pressed his little hand against her arm. A silent trust. Clara felt a lump rise in her throat. Good morning, Emilio, she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. Emilio didn't answer, but he didn't move away either. And that meant more than words ever could. For a child who barely let anyone near him, who recoiled from touch, this was monumental. Marina's grip on her silverware tightened, her knuckles turning white. Raphael simply watched, his face unreadable, but Clara could sense something in him shifting, like he had just seen something he didn't know was possible. Later that day, Clara found herself alone in the library, organizing the shelves at Marina's request. She knew it wasn't a real task. It was just another way to remind her of her place. But Clara didn't mind. She needed something to do, something to keep her from feeling like an intruder in this world of chandeliers and silk curtains. She was halfway through sorting a row of books when she heard footsteps behind her. You think you're clever, don't you? Clara turned to find Marina standing in the doorway, her arms folded, her gaze cold and sharp. Clara swallowed, forcing herself to remain calm. I don't know what you mean, Miss Marina. Marina took a slow step forward. Oh, don't play innocent, she hissed. You come in here with your sad little backstory. And now suddenly, Emilio clings to you like a lifeline? She let out a dry laugh. Do you really think you can fool me? Clara's hands clenched at her sides. I haven't fooled anyone. Emilio trusts me because I care about him. Marina's smile turned venomous. Oh, sweet girl, trust is a fragile thing. And I can break it just as easily as you built it. Clara's heart pounded. Was that a threat? Marina took another step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You won't last here. Raphael may have let you in, but I decide who stays in this house. And I promise you, your time here is running out. Clara felt her stomach twist, but she forced herself to stand tall. She had lived through too much to crumble now. I'm not here for you, Miss Marina, she said quietly. I'm here for Emilio, and I won't leave unless he tells me to. For a split second, something dark flickered in Marina's eyes. Then, with a scoff, she turned on her heel and strode out of the room. Clara let out a shaky breath. She knew now, without a doubt, Marina would not let her stay peacefully. But Clara wasn't giving up. Not on Emilio. And not on herself. That evening, as Clara was helping Emilio with a puzzle in the garden, she heard a scream. One of the maids came running from inside the house, her face pale with fear. Mr. Montoya, the maid gasped. Someone stole from Miss Marina's room. Clara froze. Raphael appeared at the top of the stairs, his brows furrowed. What are you talking about? The maid trembled. Miss Marina's jewelry, it's gone. Gasps echoed around the courtyard. Marina swept down the stairs in dramatic rage, her silk dress billowing behind her. Someone took my diamond necklace. And I know exactly who. Then, she turned, her cold gaze locking onto Clara. Clara's stomach dropped. I didn't take anything, she said firmly, but her voice shook. Marina let out a laugh. Of course you didn't. You just happened to be the only new person in this house. And you just happened to come from the streets. Whispers erupted. Clara's hands trembled. Raphael's eyes darkened. Unreadable. For the first time, Clara saw hesitation in them. A flicker of doubt. And that hurt. She turned to Emilio, desperate to prove her innocence. But Emilio just stared at her. Confused. Afraid. Clara felt her heart shatter. You can check my room, she said, her voice breaking. I have nothing to hide. Raphael nodded once. Check it. The staff hurried off, and when they returned, Clara's world collapsed. In one of the drawers in her room, they found Marina's necklace. Clara's throat tightened. I swear I didn't. Marina's eyes gleamed with triumph. You see? The little charity case couldn't resist stealing. After all, Clara looked at Raphael, pleading. You know I didn't do this, she whispered. Raphael's expression hardened. You should leave, Marina said smugly, before we call the police. Tears stung Clara's eyes. She had done nothing wrong. But she could already see it in Raphael's gaze. Doubt. After everything, he still wasn't sure if he could trust her. Clara's heart broke. Emilio took a small step toward her. Miss Clara? But before she could speak, Marina knelt beside the boy and whispered. Sweetheart, some people pretend to care about you. But they're just liars. Clara felt like she had been punched in the gut. Marina was poisoning him against her. And Raphael was letting it happen. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. But she refused to break. She turned toward the house, swallowing her pain. If that's what you believe, she said softly, then I'll go. And with that, Clara walked away, leaving behind the one place she had started to feel like home. Clara had lost everything. Again, she had been here before, wandering the cold streets with no place to call home, with no one to turn to. But this time, it hurt more, because for the first time in years, she had let herself believe she was safe, that she belonged somewhere, that she was loved, and now, she was back where she started. It had been hours since she walked out of Rafael Montoya's mansion, since she had been framed for a crime she didn't commit. She had thought Rafael believed in her, that he would defend her, that he would see the truth. But when Marina accused her of stealing, when the necklace was found in her drawer, he hesitated, and that hesitation had shattered something inside her. Now, as she trudged down the empty streets, the rain fell in heavy sheets, soaking through her thin sweater, chilling her to the bone. She had nowhere to go, no money, no shelter. Her feet ached, her breath came in ragged gasps, and every step felt heavier than the last. She passed by a bakery, the warm glow of the lights inside spilling onto the wet pavement. Through the glass, she saw a family laughing together, their hands wrapped around steaming cups of hot chocolate. Clara pressed her lips together, willing herself not to cry. It should have been her. For the first time in years, she had been part of a family again. Emilio. Her heart clenched at the thought of him. Would he believe her? Or would Marina's lies poison his mind forever? Would he remember the way she held him at night when his nightmares were too much to bear? Would he remember how she fought to bring light back into his world? Or, would he forget her? The thought nearly broke her. She stumbled to a stop in front of a park bench, gripping the back of it for support. Her body was shaking, whether from the cold or the grief. She didn't know. She had nowhere to go. And the one person she had trusted had turned his back on her. The storm raged on, the streets growing emptier by the minute. Clara sat curled on the bench, hugging her arms to her chest, trying to ignore the way the cold seeped into her bones. She should move, she knew that, but she had nowhere to go. She closed her eyes, and suddenly, memories flooded back, of nights just like this, of being 16, cold, and hungry, sitting outside a diner, watching people come and go, hoping someone would offer her a job, a meal, a chance. She had survived back then. She would survive now, wouldn't she? A rustling sound snapped her back to the present. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she tensed. A shadow moved in the alley across the street. Someone was watching her. Her heart pounded. She had spent enough time on the streets to know when she was in danger. She shot to her feet, her muscles screaming in protest, her pulse racing. Then, a voice. Familiar. Clara? She turned, startled, and her breath caught. Gabriel. Her brother. For a second, she thought she was imagining things. He stood at the edge of the street, drenched from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead, his expression haunted. Clara felt like the world had stopped spinning. "Gabriel?" she whispered. She barely had time to process it before he rushed toward her. "Clara, what are you doing here?" His voice was sharp, but there was worry in his eyes. Clara swallowed hard. I didn't have anywhere else to go." Gabriel ran a hand through his wet hair, exhaling shakily. "I know." His voice dropped. "I know what they did to you." Clara's chest tightened. "You do?" Gabriel's jaw clenched. "I saw it happen." His eyes darkened. "I was standing at the top of the stairs when Marina planted the necklace in your drawer. I saw her do it. I should have said something. I should have stopped it." Clara grabbed his hands. "Gabriel, stop. It's not your fault." His face twisted with guilt. "Yes, it is. I let her get inside my head. I believed her lies about you for so long. But when I saw what she did," he swallowed hard. I knew you were telling the truth. And I didn't do anything to stop it." Clara felt tears burn her eyes. She shook her head, gripping his hands tighter. "You're here now," she whispered. "That's what matters." Gabriel took a shaky breath, his expression raw with emotion. "Come with me," he said softly. "I know a place where you can stay. We'll figure this out together." Rafael Montoya couldn't sleep. He sat in his office, staring at the empty fireplace, gripping a glass of whiskey that he hadn't taken a sip of. His thoughts were a whirlwind, spinning out of control. Why did it feel like he had made a terrible mistake? He had spent the last few hours replaying the moment Clara walked out of his house. The way she had looked at him. Like he had broken her. Like she had expected it. Like she had been here before. And now, for the first time in years, Rafael felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Guilt. Emilio hadn't said a word since Clara left. He had gone to bed without a fight. Without a complaint. And that was not normal. Rafael exhaled sharply, rubbing his hands over his face. What if he had been wrong? What if Clara had been telling the truth? Something twisted in his gut. A feeling he couldn't shake. Then, a soft knock on his office door. He turned, surprised. "Come in." The door creaked open, and his breath hitched. "Emilio." The boy shuffled in slowly, his eyes red-rimmed, his small hands gripping the hem of his pajamas. "Papa?" His voice was barely a whisper. Rafael's heart clenched. "What is it, son?" Emilio hesitated, biting his lip. Then, with a tremble in his voice, "Miss Clara didn't do it." Rafael's throat went dry. Emilio looked up at him, his eyes pleading. "She didn't steal anything." Rafael felt his entire world tilt. His son had never spoken with such certainty. "How do you know?" Rafael asked, his voice hoarse. "Because Miss Clara loves me," Emilio said simply. And that was the moment Rafael knew. He had made a mistake. A huge mistake. And he had to fix it, before it was too late. Will Rafael realize the truth in time? Will Clara and Gabriel reunite with Emilio before Marina does more damage? If you believe Clara deserves justice, leave a comment to encourage her. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Clara was tired of running. Tired of being accused. Tired of losing everything she built. This time, she wouldn't break. She couldn't. Because now, it wasn't just about her. It was about Gabriel. It was about Emilio. It was about proving, once and for all, that Marina's lies wouldn't win. Clara sat on the small couch in Gabriel's apartment, staring out the window as the city lights flickered in the distance. The rain hadn't stopped. It was as if the heavens themselves were mourning everything she had lost. Gabriel moved quietly in the background, heating up soup on the stove. Neither of them spoke. The weight of everything was too heavy. Finally, he broke the silence. "Clara," he said, his voice hesitant. She turned to face him. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "You should fight back," he said firmly. Clara blinked, taken aback. "Gabriel." "No," he cut her off. "You always just accept things. You let people push you aside. You take the pain, and you keep going. But not this time. Not this time." Clara swallowed, her throat tight. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered. Gabriel sat beside her, his expression raw with emotion. "Prove Marina lied. Expose her." His fists clenched. "She's taken enough from us." Clara looked down, her fingers tightening in her lap. She wanted to fight. She needed to fight. But how? Marina had power, money, connections. Raphael had believed her. The court had believed her. Who would listen to Clara now? Gabriel must have sensed her hesitation because he leaned forward. His voice urgent. You didn't fight for yourself before, Clara, but this time, you're not alone. He took her hands in his. You have me, and I swear, I will stand by you. No matter what. Clara's breath hitched. It had been so long since someone had fought for her. Tears burned in her eyes. But she forced herself to be strong. Gabriel was right. If she didn't fight back, Marina would win. And she had already lost too much. She wouldn't lose again. The next morning, Clara and Gabriel went to the only person who could help them. Rafael Montoya. Clara's stomach twisted as they stood outside his office building. Her former home. Gabriel shot her a look. Are you ready? Clara took a deep breath. No, but she had to do it anyway. She nodded, and together, they stepped inside. The receptionist barely had time to react before Raphael's voice echoed through the halls. Clara? Her heart stopped. She turned, and there he was. Standing at the top of the stairs. His face etched with regret. His eyes dark with something unreadable. For a second, no one moved. Then, Raphael rushed down the stairs. His voice filled with urgency. Clara, I need to talk to you. Clara steeled herself. No, she said firmly. This time, you listen. Raphael's eyes widened slightly at her tone. But he nodded, motioning for them to follow him into his office. Once inside, Clara didn't hold back. She told him everything. About how Marina had manipulated her. How she had stolen Gabriel's trust. How she had fabricated every single lie. Raphael listened, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. When she finished, he leaned back, exhaling sharply. I was wrong, he admitted, his voice rough. Clara blinked. I should have defended you. Raphael continued, his gaze meeting hers. I should have known Marina was lying. But I didn't want to see it. And I let you suffer because of it. Clara's throat tightened. I'll fix this, Raphael said firmly. Gabriel scoffed. How? Raphael's eyes darkened. By making Marina pay. The next few weeks were a blur of investigations. Raphael hired a private team to track Marina's financial transactions. Clara and Gabriel gathered every piece of evidence they could. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth began to emerge. Marina's fake documents. Her bribed witnesses. Her hidden bank accounts. It was all there. And this time, they had the proof. The day of Marina's downfall arrived faster than Clara expected. She sat in the courtroom, her hands trembling as the judge called Marina Villanueva to the stand. Marina walked in, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her expression calm and composed. But Clara saw it, the flicker of fear in her eyes, the desperation just beneath the surface. Raphael stood. Your Honor, he said clearly. We have evidence that Marina Villanueva orchestrated an elaborate scheme to frame Clara and manipulate the legal system. The courtroom gasped. Marina's face blanched. One by one, Raphael presented the evidence. The false reports. The altered documents. The bribed witnesses. And finally, a recording. A recording of Marina herself. Threatening to destroy Clara. Clara watched as Marina's composure cracked. Her lips pressed into a tight line. Her hands clenched into fists. And then, for the first time, she looked at Clara. And Clara saw it. The realization that she had lost. That her lies had finally caught up to her. The judge didn't hesitate. Marina Villanueva, you are hereby charged with fraud, defamation, and obstruction of justice. Court is adjourned. The sound of the gavel hitting wood echoed through the room. It was over. And Clara? Clara was free. After the trial, Clara stood outside the courthouse, the cool air filling her lungs. Gabriel was beside her. Raphael stood a few feet away, watching her carefully. She turned to him. Thank you, she said softly. Raphael's expression softened. I didn't just do this for you, he admitted. I did it for Emilio. Clara's heart squeezed. Come home, Raphael said suddenly. Emilio misses you. Clara's breath hitched. Home. The place she had been cast out of. The place she had lost. She looked at Gabriel, at Raphael, and finally, she nodded. Yes, she whispered. I'm ready. And with that, Clara stepped forward into a new chapter. One where she wasn't running. One where she wasn't hiding. One where she was finally free. If you think Clara deserved justice, Leave a comment below if you think Marina got what she deserved. Like this video. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Because in the end, truth always wins. And Clara? She finally got the ending she deserved. Clara sat in the quiet hospital room. The beeping of the monitors the only sound breaking the silence. Emilio was asleep, his small chest rising and falling steadily. His tiny hands curled into fists. He looked so peaceful, so innocent. Clara reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, her fingers trembling. Everything she had done, all the pain she had endured, had been for him. To protect him, to give him a life worth living. And now, it was all falling apart. Because Marina wasn't done, and this time, she was playing dirty. The moment Clara stepped outside the hospital, she felt it, a cold presence, a shadow lingering just beyond her reach. Then, a voice. "Miss me?" Clara froze. Slowly, she turned, and there she was, Marina Villanueva, leaning against a sleek black car, a cruel smile on her lips, her eyes gleaming with dangerous amusement. Clara's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "What do you want?" she asked, voice steady despite the terror coiling in her stomach. Marina sighed dramatically, inspecting her manicured nails. "Oh, Clara," she said sweetly, "you wound me. Can't I just say hello to an old friend?" Clara clenched her fists. "You're not my friend." Marina chuckled. "No, I suppose not." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "But I am someone who can destroy you." Clara's breath hitched. "Leave me alone, Marina." Marina tilted her head, feigning innocence. "See, I would, but then I wouldn't have nearly as much fun." Clara's pulse roared in her ears. Marina was playing with her, testing her, looking for a weakness. "Stay away from me," Clara said again, firmer this time. Marina's smile widened. "And if I don't?" Clara stiffened. Then, Marina's gaze darkened. "You think you've won, don't you?" she murmured. "Just because you embarrassed me in court? Because you made Raphael turn against me?" Clara didn't answer. "Sweetheart," Marina continued, voice dripping with venom, "this isn't over. It will never be over." Then, she leaned in, and whispered words that made Clara's blood run cold. "Enjoy Emilio while you can." Clara's stomach dropped. "What did you say?" she whispered. Marina only smirked, stepping back. And then, she was gone. Clara stood there, shaking, fear crawling up her spine like a living thing. Because she knew, Marina had just made a promise. And Marina Villanueva always kept her promises. Clara didn't waste a second. She ran back into the hospital, pushing past people, ignoring the confused looks. She needed to see Emilio. To make sure he was safe. She burst into his room. And stopped cold. The bed was empty. Her heart stopped. "No, no, no, no. Emilio." The nurse at the station turned in surprise. "Miss Collins? Where is he?" Clara gasped, panic rising like wildfire. The nurse frowned. "A man came to pick him up. Said he was family." Clara felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Family? Emilio didn't have any family, except her. Her hands shook violently. This was Marina. She had taken him. Clara's mind spiraled into chaos. She had to think. She had to find him. Before it was too late. Clara searched for hours. Calling Raphael. Calling the police. Begging. Pleading for someone to help. But there was nothing. No trace of Emilio. No one had seen him. And Clara was running out of time. Then, a message. Her phone buzzed. A blocked number. A single text. "Come alone, or he disappears forever." Attached was a photo. Emilio. Crying. A cold warehouse in the background. Clara felt nauseous. This was it. Marina wanted to break her. And if she didn't do something now, Emilio would be gone forever. The warehouse was deserted. The air was thick with the scent of metal and gasoline. Clara stepped inside, her every nerve screaming at her to run. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. Because Emilio was here. Then, laughter. Slow. Mocking. "You're predictable, Clara." She turned, and there Marina stood. Dressed in black, arms crossed, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Where is he?" Clara demanded. Marina smirked, and snapped her fingers. A door creaked open, and Emilio was dragged out. Clara saw red. Tears streaked his face. His little hands trembled. Clara's body moved on instinct. She lunged forward, But two men blocked her path. Marina sighed. Tisk, tisk. Clara, always so impulsive. Clara's breath came fast and shallow. What do you want? She choked out. Marina tilted her head. Simple, she said. I want you to suffer. Clara's blood turned to ice. But, Marina continued, I also want to make you a deal. Clara froze. What kind of deal? Marina's eyes gleamed. You walk away, she said. Leave Raphael. Leave Gabriel. Disappear. Her smile widened. And Emilio lives. Clara's stomach twisted. She couldn't breathe. If she agreed, she lost everything. If she refused, she might lose Emilio. Her hands trembled. Her mind screamed in protest. Then, a sound. A familiar voice. Clara. Emilio. His tiny, broken voice. And Clara knew. She could never walk away. Her hands curled into fists. Let him go, Marina, she said, her voice steady. Marina raised an eyebrow. Or what? Then, boom, a door burst open. Police. Gabriel. Raphael. Chaos erupted. Gunshots. Shouts. And Clara? She ran. Straight for Emilio. She grabbed him, held him tight, as sirens wailed in the background. Then, silence. And Marina? She was gone. Captured. Finally defeated. Clara sat in the hospital room again. This time, not in fear, but in relief. Emilio slept soundly beside her. Gabriel sat nearby, arms crossed, eyes still burning with anger. Raphael stood by the window, hands in his pockets. They had won. Clara exhaled shakily. It was over. They were safe. She looked at Emilio. And for the first time in years, she let herself believe. They had a future. A real future. Together. And Marina? She would never hurt them again. The days after Marina's defeat felt like a dream. For the first time in years, Clara woke up without fear. No more looking over her shoulder. No more waiting for the next attack. Marina was gone. Behind bars. And yet, a small voice in the back of Clara's mind whispered, is it really over? She shook the thought away as she walked into Emilio's room. The little boy sat on the edge of his bed, legs swinging, his face bright with excitement. Clara, he giggled, holding up a drawing. Clara smiled, her heart swelling. What's this, little one? Emilio pointed eagerly. This is me, and you, and Raphael and Gabriel. Clara looked at the picture, feeling a lump in her throat. A small house, a family, a future, her dream. Emilio beamed. We're all together. Forever, right? Clara's smile faltered for just a second. Forever. If only life were that simple. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the Gutierrez mansion as Clara made her way to the kitchen. The smell of coffee drifted through the air, mixing with the quiet hum of the world waking up. She found Gabriel sitting at the table, flipping through a book, his usual brooding expression in place. Morning, Clara greeted. Gabriel grunted. Barely. She chuckled, pouring herself a cup. How's school? Gabriel shrugged. It's school. Clara raised an eyebrow. That bad? Gabriel hesitated, then sighed. It's not bad. It's just, I don't fit in there. I never have. Clara's heart ached. She knew that feeling too well. You will, she said gently. It takes time. Gabriel didn't respond. Instead, he tapped his fingers against the table. His expression distant. You ever feel like? He trailed off, frowning. Clara tilted her head. Like what? Gabriel's jaw tightened. Like something bad is coming. Clara stiffened. Her stomach twisted with unease. Why would you say that? Gabriel's fingers drummed faster. I don't know, he muttered. Just a feeling. Clara forced a smile. Don't overthink it. Gabriel, we're safe now. But deep down, she knew. Gabriel's instincts were never wrong. And neither were hers. That evening, Clara curled up in the living room, a book resting in her lap. Raphael sat nearby, flipping through paperwork, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. She watched him for a moment. The way his jaw clenched. The way his fingers traced the edges of the pages. He looked worried. Clara's chest tightened. Something wrong? She asked softly. Raphael sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I just got a report from my lawyers. About Marina. Clara's heart dropped. What about her? Raphael hesitated. Then, he handed her the document. Clara's hands shook as she skimmed the page. And then, her blood ran cold. Marina Villanueva had escaped. The room spun. The words blurred together. She looked up, barely able to breathe. When? 2 nights ago, Raphael said grimly. Clara felt sick. 2 nights ago. While she had been laughing with Emilio. While she had been dreaming of a future. Marina had been out there, planning her next move. Clara's hands clenched around the paper. This nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every nerve on edge. Emilio's soft breathing filled the room. She turned her head, watching him sleep, so innocent, so unaware of the danger lurking just beyond their doorstep. A single thought tormented her. What if Marina comes back for him? The idea alone made her chest tighten with unbearable fear. She swung her legs over the bed, walking to the window. Outside, the moon cast long shadows over the garden. A breeze rattled the trees. She hugged herself, trying to shake the unease. Then, a noise, a rustling outside. Her pulse spiked. She pressed her face to the glass, eyes scanning the darkness. Nothing. She exhaled shakily. Just her imagination, right? 2 days passed. No sign of Marina. No calls. No threats. Just silence. But that only made Clara more afraid. Because Marina wasn't the type to stay quiet. And then, it happened. A crash. Glass shattering. Clara jerked awake, her heart hammering. Then, a scream. Gabriel. She bolted out of bed, racing down the hall. Gabriel. She burst into his room. And froze. A masked figure stood by the window. Gabriel was struggling, fighting them off. And then, a voice. Cold. Cruel. Enough. The intruder stopped. Clara's stomach dropped. Because standing in the doorway was Marina. Her eyes gleamed with dark satisfaction. Did you miss me? She purred. Clara couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Marina smiled. I told you, she whispered. This isn't over. Marina lunged. Clara barely dodged, grabbing a lamp and swinging. It shattered against Marina's arm. She hissed in pain. Gabriel punched the masked intruder, sending them stumbling back. Run! Clara screamed. Gabriel grabbed her arm, and they ran. Down the hall, down the stairs, to Emilio's room. They burst inside. He was asleep, unaware. Clara scooped him up, his small body limp in her arms. Then, a gunshot. The wall exploded beside her. She screamed. Clara! Raphael's voice boomed from downstairs. More footsteps. More shouting. Police. The house was swarming. Marina's plan had failed. She knew it. And for the first time, Clara saw fear in her eyes. Don't think this is over. Marina snarled. Then, she was gone, disappearing into the night. The mansion was in ruins. Glass everywhere. The police swarmed the house, asking questions. Clara sat on the floor, holding Emilio tightly, pressing kisses to his forehead. Gabriel sat beside her, his hands trembling. Raphael stood over them, his expression dark with fury. She won't stop, Clara whispered. Raphael's jaw tightened. No, he said, she won't. Silence. Then, Gabriel's voice, soft, determined. Then we end this. Clara looked up. Gabriel's hands were clenched into fists, his eyes blazing. She won't stop, he said again, unless we stop her first. Clara swallowed hard. Because Gabriel was right. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about fighting back. And this time, they weren't going to run. The mansion had never felt this quiet before. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. Not the comforting silence of a home at rest. This was the kind of quiet that pressed down on your chest. The kind of quiet that meant something was wrong. Clara sat by the window, staring at the moonlit garden below. Her fingers trembled against the cold glass. It had been 3 weeks since Marina's attack. 3 weeks of uneasy peace. 3 weeks of waiting for her to strike again. She knew it was coming. Gabriel knew it, too. Even Raphael, who was always so calm, so rational, had started double-checking the security cameras every night. And Emilio? The little boy who used to sleep soundly now woke up crying. Clutching Clara's shirt, whispering in his small, trembling voice, "Is she coming back?" Clara had no answer, because she didn't know, but deep down, she feared the truth. Yes, Marina was coming back, and this time, she wouldn't fail. The morning air was heavy when Clara woke up. Something felt off. She sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes, trying to shake the sense of dread curling in her stomach. Then, her phone buzzed. A text message. Clara grabbed the phone and froze. A single message. No number. No name. Just words. "Did you really think you won?" Clara's breath caught in her throat. Then, another message. "I always finish what I start." Her hands shook as she read the final words. "See you soon, darling." She dropped the phone like it had burned her. Her pulse pounded. Her chest tightened. Her worst fear was coming true. Marina wasn't done. She never was. Clara stormed downstairs, her heart racing. She found Raphael in the study, scanning the security footage. "She texted me," Clara blurted out. Raphael's head snapped up. Gabriel, who had been leaning against the desk, stood up sharply. "What?" Clara threw the phone on the table. Raphael's face darkened as he read the messages. Gabriel cursed under his breath. Raphael exhaled slowly. "She's playing mind games," he said, his voice eerily calm. Clara gritted her teeth. "I don't care what she's playing at. We have to do something. Now." Raphael nodded. "We will." Gabriel's fists clenched. "I say we find her first." Raphael shook his head. "She's smart. She'll expect that." Gabriel scoffed. "So what? We just sit here and wait?" Clara looked between them, her body tense. Waiting felt like torture. But Raphael was right. Marina was too calculated, too patient. And if she was texting now, it meant she was ready. Ready to end this. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She tossed, turned. Every noise made her jump. She was about to drift off when a crash. Clara bolted upright. Her breath caught. A gunshot echoed in the distance. Then, a scream. "Gabriel!" Clara sprang out of bed, her feet hitting the cold floor as she ran. Down the hall, through the mansion, to Gabriel's room. She threw open the door, and her blood ran cold. Gabriel was on the floor. A figure stood over him, a gun in their hand. And behind them, Marina. Her smile was poison. "Hello, Clara." Clara couldn't breathe. Marina tilted her head, watching her like a cat watches a trapped mouse. "Surprised?" Gabriel groaned, trying to get up. Clara's stomach twisted in fear. "Let him go." Marina laughed. "Let him go?" She stepped closer, gun still in her hand. "Why would I do that?" Clara clenched her fists. "Because if you don't." Marina cocked the gun. "You'll what?" Clara froze. She had no weapon, no plan, nothing but pure, raw desperation. Marina smirked. "That's what I thought." She turned to her masked accomplice. "Take the boy." Gabriel struggled. "No." Clara screamed. Marina's accomplice grabbed him, dragging him toward the door. Clara lunged forward, but Marina aimed the gun at Emilio's door. One step closer, and the kid gets it next. Clara froze in place. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Marina's smile was ice. "Now be a good girl and stay put." And then, she walked out, with Gabriel, with her brother, and Clara was left standing there, helpless. Hours passed. The mansion was in chaos. Police swarmed the place. Raphael was on the phone, calling every contact he had. Emilio was crying in Clara's arms, his tiny body shaking with fear. And Clara? She was numb, staring at the front door, waiting, praying. Gabriel was out there, alone, with her. Tears burned in Clara's eyes. She had promised him. She had promised to protect him. And now, she had failed. Her phone rang. Clara snatched it up. "Hello?" A pause. Then, Marina's voice. Smooth. Cruel. "Did you enjoy my little surprise?" Clara's hands clenched into fists. "Where is he?" Marina chuckled. "Oh, Clara." A pause. "You're going to have to work a little harder than that if you want him back." Clara's chest ached. She could hear muffled sounds in the background. A struggle. "Gabriel." She felt sick. "What do you want?" she whispered. Marina sighed dramatically. "Oh, you know, the usual." Another pause. "Revenge." Clara gritted her teeth. "Name your price." Marina laughed. "You think this is about money?" A sharp clap sounded. A yelp of pain. "Gabriel." Clara gasped. Marina's voice dropped to a whisper. "I want you to suffer." Clara's vision blurred with rage. "Let him go." Marina. Another scream. Clara's heart shattered. And then, silence. A single breath from Marina. And then, the line went dead. Clara stood in the middle of the room. The phone slipped from her fingers. Tears burned in her eyes. Her body shook with rage. Gabriel needed her. And this time, she wouldn't fail. She couldn't fail. Because now, this wasn't just about surviving. This was about finishing this. For good. Clara wiped her tears away. Fire burning in her chest. She turned to Raphael. Get the car. Raphael frowned. Clara, we're getting him back. Her voice was pure steel. Marina thought she had won. She thought Clara was weak. But she was wrong. Because Clara had one thing Marina never had. A reason to fight. Will Clara save Gabriel? Will Marina finally fall? Comment below and share your thoughts. Like and subscribe, because the final showdown is coming. The city was alive with flashing lights and sirens. Clara sat in the back of Raphael's speeding car. Her hands clenched into fists. Her breath shallow. Every second that passed felt like a lifetime. Gabriel was out there, alone, with her. And Clara had already lost him once. She wouldn't lose him again. Not now. Not ever. The car screeched to a halt in front of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Dark. Silent. A graveyard of metal and concrete. The kind of place where things disappeared forever. Clara's heart pounded as she climbed out of the car. Raphael followed, scanning the area. This is it, he murmured. Clara swallowed hard. Then let's go. Her voice was steel. They pushed forward, slipping through a broken side door. The inside was cold, damp. The air smelled like rust and old gasoline. And then, a sound. A low groan from the shadows. Clara spun around. Gabriel? A choked cough. Then, a familiar voice. See Clara? Her heart stopped. Gabriel was there, tied to a chair in the middle of the room. A bruise bloomed on his cheek. His wrists were red from the tight rope. Clara ran forward, but a voice stopped her cold. Not so fast, sweetheart. Clara's blood turned to ice. Marina stepped out of the darkness, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. She held a gun, calm, casual, like it was an extension of her hand. Did you really think you could just walk in here and take him? Clara's chest tightened. Let him go, Marina, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Marina smiled. I don't think so. She tilted her head, eyes gleaming. Not after everything you took from me. Clara's fists tightened. I never took anything from you. Marina's smile vanished. You stole my future. Clara, my life, my power. She raised the gun. You have no idea what it feels like to lose everything. Clara stepped forward. I do. Her voice shook, but she kept going. I lost my brother. I lost my childhood. I lost my home. And you? She took another step. You're trying to take away the only family I have left. Marina's finger tightened on the trigger. Too late. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. Then, a loud crash. Raphael had moved fast. A chair slammed into Marina's side, sending her staggering. Her gun skidded across the floor. Clara dove for it. Marina lunged forward. A struggle. Hands grasping. Fingers clawing. A sudden bang. The shot echoed through the warehouse. For a second, nobody moved. Then, Marina collapsed. Clara's breath came fast, ragged. The gun shook in her hands. She hadn't meant to pull the trigger. But now, Marina lay on the ground, gasping, eyes wide. Blood spread across her shoulder. Not a fatal wound, but enough. Enough to end this. Marina's laugh was bitter. You think you won? Her voice was weak, but her hatred still burned. Clara knelt beside her, her chest tight. I don't care about winning, she whispered. Marina's lips curled. You should, because I'll never stop. Clara's throat ached. She had so many reasons to hate this woman. So many reasons to let her bleed out. But she couldn't, because she was not like Marina. She never would be. Clara pulled off her jacket and pressed it against Marina's wound. Marina gasped in shock. You're saving me? Clara's hands shook. Because someone has to break the cycle. Sirens screamed in the distance. Marina's face twisted in rage. Disbelief. Pain. Then, a bitter laugh. You'll regret this, Clara. Clara met her gaze. No. She gripped Gabriel's hand. I won't. The months after Marina's downfall were not easy. There were police reports, trials, questions. But at the end of it all, Marina was gone. For good. And Clara's family? They were free. The mansion felt different. No more whispers in the halls. No more looking over their shoulders. For the first time in years, they could breathe. Gabriel still had scars. They all did. But he was healing. Every day. He went back to school. Started smiling again. And Clara? She found purpose. She took classes. Became a real nurse. Helping children. Helping families. Giving back the love she had fought so hard to keep. And then, there was Raphael. The man who had stood beside her through everything. The man who had risked his life to save her brother. The man who had become more than just a protector. One evening, under the soft glow of the mansion's garden lights, he took her hands. "Clara," he murmured. She looked up, breath-catching. "You changed my life," Raphael said. "You gave me something to fight for again." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "You saved me," she whispered. Raphael smiled. "No." He brushed a thumb against her cheek. "We saved each other." Then, he pulled out a small velvet box. Clara's heart stopped. "I love you, Clara." His voice was soft, steady. "And I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much." The tears fell freely now. She nodded, laughing and crying all at once. "Yes." And when he slipped the ring onto her finger, Clara knew. This was it. This was home. The city lights flickered in the distance as Clara stood on the balcony of the Gutierrez mansion. The cool night air brushing against her skin. For the first time in years, there was peace. Marina was gone. Gabriel was safe. Raphael was by her side. Everything she had fought for, everything she had sacrificed, it had all led to this moment. And yet, something inside her still felt unsettled. Like a shadow she couldn't shake. Something unfinished. Something she had avoided for far too long. Her past. It arrived on a quiet morning. A plain envelope. No return address. Just her name, written in familiar handwriting. Clara felt her heart stop. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. And when she read the first words, she sank into a chair, breath catching in her throat. "Clara, if you're reading this, I need to see you." Her father. The man who had abandoned her years ago. The man she had sworn she would never forgive. The memories came rushing back. The nights she spent alone, waiting for him to return. The empty promises. The hunger. The cold. The fear of being left behind. She had buried it all. Locked it away. And now, with one letter, it had all come back. "Clara, you don't have to do this." Raphael's voice was gentle as he sat beside her. Concern in his eyes. Gabriel stood in the doorway. Arms crossed. His expression unreadable. "I know," Clara whispered, staring at the letter. "But I think I need to." Gabriel scoffed. "Why? After everything he did?" Clara swallowed hard. Because she needed to know. Because no matter how much she had tried to pretend he didn't exist, there was still a part of her that ached for answers. A part of her that still wondered, why wasn't I enough for him to stay? She turned to Gabriel, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not doing this for him." She looked down at the letter again. "I'm doing this for me." The small apartment on the other side of the city was nothing like she remembered. It smelled of dust and regret. The walls were bare, the furniture old and worn. And in the middle of it all, a man she barely recognized. Her father. Thinner than she remembered. Older. Tired. Clara's breath caught in her throat. For so long, she had imagined this moment. She had pictured herself screaming at him, demanding answers, making him feel the same pain he had caused her. But standing there now, she felt none of that. Only an overwhelming sense of sorrow. Not just for herself, but for him, too. "Clara?" His voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. He gestured toward the small, rickety chair across from him. "Sit down." Clara hesitated but took a seat. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Silence stretched between them. Then, finally, "I know I don't deserve this," he said, his voice thick with regret. "But thank you for coming." Clara stared at him, her heart pounding. "Why now?" she whispered. Her father sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Because I'm dying." The words hit like a train. Clara's breath caught. A long silence filled the air. Finally, she found her voice. "So what do you want from me?" she asked. Her tone carefully controlled. "Forgiveness?" He swallowed hard. "I want you to know that I'm sorry." He exhaled shakily, looking down at his hands. "I should have been there. I should have fought for you. But I was a coward. I ran from responsibility. I ran from you." His voice cracked. "And I regret it every single day." Clara's chest tightened. She had waited her whole life to hear those words. But now, hearing them, she didn't know what to do with them. You don't get to just say you're sorry and expect me to forget everything. Clara whispered, her hands shaking. Her father nodded slowly. I know. He swallowed. I just needed to tell you before it was too late. Clara stood up, feeling like she couldn't breathe. She had thought she wanted this. Thought she needed to hear him say it. But all it did was bring back the pain. And she didn't want to live in that pain anymore. She looked down at him, her heart torn in two. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Her father nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. A heavy silence filled the room. Then, Clara turned toward the door. And for a moment, she thought she would leave. But then she heard it. A soft cough. A ragged breath. A reminder that no matter what he had done, he was still her father. And she had to decide. Would she carry this anger forever? Or would she let it go? Clara stood in the doorway, her heart pounding. Then, she slowly turned back. I can't erase what happened, she whispered. Her father's eyes filled with tears. But I don't want to spend the rest of my life hating you. A sob shook his body. I don't deserve this, Clara. Clara nodded. No, you don't. She took a deep breath. But I do. For herself. For Gabriel. For the life she had fought so hard to build. Because holding on to anger wasn't freedom. Forgiveness was. And so, she sat back down. Not for him, but for her. The night was heavy with silence. Clara sat by the window of the Gutierrez mansion, her fingers gripping the letter in her hands. Her heart was racing, her mind spinning. This couldn't be happening. She read the words again, hoping, praying, that she had misunderstood. But the message was clear. Her brother Gabriel was in danger. And the only way to save him was to leave everything behind. Her home, her new family, Rafael, Emilio, everything she had fought so hard to build. And just like that, the world she had finally found peace in was slipping away. The letter had come without warning. An unmarked envelope. No name. Just her brother's life hanging in the balance. She read the words again. Her breath shallow. Clara, if you love your brother, come alone. No police. No Gutierrez. Or Gabriel suffers. Her hands trembled. It had to be Marina. Even from the shadows, she was still trying to destroy them. She clenched her fists. After everything they had been through. After finally winning Gabriel back. Would she lose him again? Would Marina win? Not if she could help it. Clara, you're not going alone. Raphael's voice was firm, but she couldn't look at him. She stared at the letter. At the ultimatum written between the lines. If she told anyone, if she let Raphael or Alejandro or anyone else help, Gabriel would pay the price. I have to, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Gabriel was her responsibility, her little brother, and if she had to sacrifice herself to save him, then she would. Raphael stepped closer, his hands gripping her shoulders. Listen to me, he said, his voice shaking with emotion. You don't have to do this alone. Clara closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears. I do, because if she lost him again, she would never forgive herself. Clara stood at Emilio's bedroom door, watching the little boy sleep. His soft breath rose and fell. His tiny hands curled around the stuffed bear she had given him. Tears burned in her eyes. She had never meant to leave him. She had promised to be there for him. But now she was about to break that promise. She leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. I love you, Emilio, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. She turned away before the tears could fall. In the hallway, Gabriel's door was slightly open. She hesitated. If she went in, if she saw him, she might not have the strength to leave. So she didn't. She turned toward the door and walked out into the night. The warehouse was cold and empty, the dim light flickering overhead. Clara's footsteps echoed as she stepped inside, her heart pounding. Gabriel? She called, her voice shaky. Silence. Then, a slow, deliberate clap. She froze. And from the shadows, Marina stepped forward. Clara, she purred, a wicked smile stretching across her face. I knew you'd come. Clara's fists clenched. Where is my brother? She demanded. Marina tilted her head, amusement in her cold, dark eyes. Safe, she said. For now. Clara's stomach twisted. What do you want? She whispered. Marina stepped closer, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. I want revenge, she said simply. Clara's breath caught. I want you to pay for taking everything from me. She circled Clara like a predator. And I want you to suffer. Marina pulled out a small silver key from her pocket, twirling it between her fingers. This, she said, holding it up, is the key to your brother's freedom. Clara's heart stopped. But I won't give it to you for free. She stepped closer, her voice dropping into a whisper. I want you to leave Raphael. Clara's stomach dropped. Leave him, disappear, and never come back. Marina's lips curled. Break his heart, make him hate you. And then, maybe, I'll let Gabriel go. Clara felt sick. Marina knew. She knew what Raphael meant to her. She was forcing her to choose. And Clara knew. She had no choice at all. The next morning, Raphael stood in the garden, waiting for her. Clara's heart was breaking. She had to do this. She had to lie. She had to make him believe it. She stepped forward, forcing herself to keep her voice cold. I can't do this anymore. Raphael frowned. Clara. She turned away before he could see the tears in her eyes. I never loved you. She heard him take a sharp breath. You're lying. She clenched her fists. She had to make it real. You were a distraction, she said, forcing herself to say the words. Raphael's face twisted in pain. Don't do this, he whispered. Clara swallowed hard. Goodbye, Raphael. And then, she walked away, leaving behind the only man she had ever loved. The deal was made. Marina let Gabriel go. But at what cost? Clara stood outside the mansion, watching from the shadows as Raphael sat alone, his face filled with heartbreak. She had saved her brother. But she had destroyed herself. And now, for the first time in her life, she had nothing left to fight for. The sun had never shined so brightly. Yet, inside, Clara felt like she was still standing in the darkness. The decision she had made, the sacrifice she had chosen, had left scars deeper than any wound. She had saved Gabriel, but she had lost Raphael. She had lost herself. And now, standing at the edge of the Gutierrez mansion's gates, she wondered, had she done the right thing? Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still, the space Raphael once filled in her life was empty. Gabriel was safe, living his life free from Marina's grasp. Emilio was thriving, no longer the scared little boy she had first met. Alejandro had returned to his work, still watching over her like a protective guardian. Everything was fine, but that was the problem. Clara didn't want things to be fine. She wanted him. She wanted love. But how could she go back? She had broken Raphael's heart. And she didn't deserve to ask for another chance. One evening, just as the sky turned golden with the sunset, Alejandro called her into his office. There, sitting neatly on the desk, was a letter. Clara frowned, picking it up with trembling hands. The handwriting was familiar. And as she opened it, her heart stopped. It was from Raphael. Clara, I don't know why you left. I don't know why you lied to me. But I do know one thing. I still love you. And I don't believe that love just disappears. If you ever need me, really need me, you know where to find me. Raphael. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the letter to her chest. She had thought she had lost him forever. But maybe, just maybe, she still had a chance. The Gutierrez estate had always been beautiful. But Raphael's ranch, it was a different kind of beauty. Simple, honest, just like the man who had captured her heart. Clara hesitated at the front gate, her palms sweaty as she looked up at the house. What if he had moved on? What if he had changed his mind? She almost turned around, almost ran away. But then, the door opened, and there he was, Raphael, looking just as breathtaking as the first day she had met him. His dark eyes locked onto hers, filled with a mix of emotions she couldn't quite decipher. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, finally, he spoke. You're here. Clara's throat tightened. I never wanted to leave, she whispered. His jaw clenched. Then why did you? She took a deep breath. Because now, finally, he deserved to know the truth. She told him everything. About the letter. About Marina's threats. About the deal she had made to save Gabriel's life. And the moment she said the words, Raphael's entire expression changed. Anger. Pain. But most of all, love. You did all that, he murmured, stepping closer. For your brother? Clara nodded, tears burning in her eyes. I thought it was the only way. Raphael exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Damn it, Clara, he whispered. Then, before she could say another word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her, protecting her, loving her, just like he always had. And for the first time in months, Clara finally felt whole again. From that day on, everything changed. Clara no longer felt like a woman running from the past. She was walking toward her future. And this time, she wasn't alone. She and Raphael rebuilt their love, piece by piece. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And that was all that mattered. Gabriel, now free from Marina's chains, finally had the chance to find himself. And with Alejandro's help, he did. He enrolled in college, studying business and law, not just for his future, but to make sure no one else was ever manipulated the way he had been. He wanted to make a difference. And for the first time in his life, he believed he could. Emilio's health continued to improve. Clara stayed by his side, encouraging him, watching him grow. And on his 9th birthday, something miraculous happened. For the first time in his life, he took his first unassisted step. Raphael caught Clara's hand as they watched from the doorway, his eyes filled with pride. "See," he whispered, "miracles do happen." Clara smiled, squeezing his fingers. "Yes, they really do." 1 year later, Clara and Raphael stood at the altar, their hands clasped, their hearts beating as one. Gabriel was Raphael's best man. Emilio stood beside him, holding the rings with the biggest smile in the world. And as Raphael whispered, "Forever?" Clara answered, without hesitation, "Forever." Because after everything they had been through, after all the pain, the loss, the sacrifices, they had finally found their happily ever after. And this time, nothing would ever take it away. Sometimes, the hardest decisions lead to the greatest rewards. Clara had to make an impossible choice, but in the end, love found its way back to her. Family is not just about blood, it's about the people who stand by you. Gabriel, Alejandro, Emilio, and Raphael, they became a real family through love. Not just genetics. Never let fear stop you from fighting for what matters. Clara almost let fear keep her away from Raphael. But when she found the courage to face the truth, she got her happily ever after. Healing takes time, but it's always possible. No matter how broken Gabriel felt, no matter how much pain Emilio endured, they found a way forward. What did you think of Clara's story? Drop a comment below and tell us, did Clara make the right choice? Like this video if you believe in second chances. Subscribe now for more stories that will touch your heart and make you believe in love again. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Because at the end of the day, love, sacrifice, and hope will always find a way. And this was just the beginning of Clara and Raphael's forever. Thank you for watching.